Dear students, welcome to today's lecture on the topic access control. So in the previous lecture we have seen about the authentication, the procedure in which we will identify and verify the authenticity of a user. So after the process of authentication, the next step in order to provide security is to prohibit the user or the process from accessing those resources which are unauthorized to access for the user. Means only the content which should be authorized to that particular user, only up to that the user or any program should access, should able to access. Means for example, we need to control the access of getting the information on any manager by an employee. So, in such a case, an employee should get a message that you are not allowed to watch the details of the manager. Like that, we have to control the access up to the authorized access extent only. Means we should disallow the access of unauthorized. Even though he is authenticated, up to what extent he should be allowed, up to that extent he should be allowed. He should not allowed even the modifications in the database like that. It should not allow. So that is access control. We have to control the access. Okay. So we have to prohibit the unauthorized rights of that particular data. So this issue is called authorization and it is dealt by the by using access control mechanisms. Means by implementing this access control mechanism, we can control the access rights of a user. So let us know what some of the terms used in access control. The first one is objects. This object is what the user tries to get. The data is nothing but an object. So it is an entity to which access must be controlled. Say for example, whenever if I want to modify the data in the database and I am not an authorized user for that purpose, then my access should be controlled without giving a chance to update the database. Okay, so that database is nothing but as an object. So it may be a file or a database, a semaphore or any tree data structure or anything which we are a user will try to access. That entity is called as an object and we have to control this access from unauthorized users. Subjects. In the previous example, I will become an active entity in which I want to access the database. Okay. Like that, subject is an active entity, means any user or a program whose access to objects must be controlled. Means my access to the object, that is database, should be controlled like that. Okay? That is entities wishing to access and perform operations on objects. What operation I would like to perform in our example? I thought to update the any figure in the database. Update anything in the database, that is an operation. So on which I am going to perform that operation. I want to perform it on database. So that is an object. So entities, subjects comes as entities wishing to access and perform operations on these objects. Okay. All the process and users are examples of subjects. And the next term is protection rules. See, these are the rules which define the possible ways in which these both subject and objects will interact. Means, see here, this is an associated pair of subject and object. It is an access right which defines the subset of all possible operations for the object type. Say for example, so and so X can access the object Y. Like that, a pair will be maintained and complete set of access rights of system defines which subjects can perform what operations on which objects. Means some objects are there, some subjects are there. This subject can perform what type of operations on this object is nothing but this protection rules. And the next thing is protection domains. So we can also say the protection rules as privileges to the user. Means for example, if subject is there, means user A can access the object, suppose any file F1 in his access right is only up to reading. He cannot write the data to file 1 or he cannot execute that file. Means that protection rules. Subject we are saying that user A and object is file 1 F1. So that combination we will maintain it as a subset of all set of possible operations which can be performed on this file F1. So here from time to time, the subjects may need to change the set of access rights. Every time I may not be I may not only be accessing that file F1. Some user B wants to access that file. In such a case, that access right privileges should be changed. Means maybe user B can write data to a file. He may have the access. Like that, every time the set of access rights are subject to change. Why? Because depending upon the particular user and at the point of time, the accessibility of different users and different objects will change. So a domain is nothing but an abstract definition of set of access rights. So it defines a set of these object pairs. A domain will specify object pairs, and each pair specifies an object and one or more operations that can be performed on that particular object. So each one of the allowed operations is called as a right. Right means we can say that all those allowed operations on that particular object. So object comma rights pair we will maintain. So this is the example which shows about the three protection domains D1, D2 and D3. So domains need not be disjoint, they can be in intersection form and the same access right may simultaneously exist in two domains. So for example, both domains D1 and D2, this one semaphore 1 up down is in both domains D1 and in D2. So this implies that this subject is either of the two domains on semaphore 1. Okay. And the same object can exist in multiple domains. See here, file F1 is existing, object is existing in both the domains, but the different rights are there. Right here in domain 1 for file 1 read, write, execute is there, but in domain 2 for the file 1 only read and write permissions are there. There is no execute for D2, for domain people under D2. So if if an object exists in one only in single domain, it can be accessed only by the subjects of that domain. Means if somebody else from another domain need to access, there is an access control in which we are controlling the access of different domains. So each user as a domain, he will assign, each user assign with one domain, and according to this identity of the user, they will be given permission to the domains. So depending upon access rights, they will be executed. So in this pattern, we are seeing in the domain we have these three files: file 1, file 2, file semaphore 1. Here file 1 is existing, file 2 is existing. These two files are also existing in domain D2, but with different access rights. And domain D3 is having file 3 with the read, write and execute permissions. So this is a system having three protection domains. And the next is the access matrix. This is a domain-based protection approach, and in this the system will always keep track of which rights on which objects belong to particular domain. Say for example, if anybody D3 want to access a file on D1, it will observe is it valid request or not. It will observe. So we will see this table format of access matrix. Means this matrix consists with these rows and columns, and this is the ring architecture of multi protection domains. Okay. Means ring 0 is most powerful, ring 1, ring 2, so on. We will have like this ring structure. So information is represented as a matrix, and it is called as an access matrix. Okay. So in case of access matrix model, we will have the information in a matrix format which consists with rows and columns, and it is represented in this form. So here we will control the access in the multi protection domain like this. Means this is most powerful domain, and access going on inside, the access rights will be decreased. Okay. And here if you see this one, the rows represent the domains D1, D2 and D3. Here the rows are representing the domains, and the columns will represent the objects. Okay, domains and objects. Next, each entry in this access matrix consists of a set of access rights. Means here we will have the access rights. In the previous example, in the figure, we have shown for D1, in domain D1, the file F1 is having the access right, read, write and execute. But in D2, we are having only read and write. I hope you remember this. D2. In D2, file F1 is having read, write permissions only. So we have written the same in this access matrix, read and write. Similarly, on domain D1, for what are the file permissions for F2? That is read. Like that, semaphore up down and means we can increase and decrease the values of some outputs. And for D2, we have file permissions, read, write, and execute. The same, whatever file permissions for read, write, and execute. But for here, file 2 has only read permission. The same we have written in this matrix. Like this, how many domains if you have in any number of domains we can add, and we can add any number of objects to this matrix. By looking this, it will control the access of the user. So when an access matrix is used to represent this protection state of a system, we need to resolve some issues like this: how to decide the contents of this access matrix entries, how to validate access to objects by subjects, means if this object is there, how to validate the access of this object by subjects, and how to allow subjects to switch domains in a controlled manner. How can we switch? And how to allow changes to protection state of the system. These are some of the issues need to be dealt. Normally, these issues will be solved by using these two methods: allowing controls change to the protection state and deciding the contents of access matrix entries. So by using these two methods, we can handle the issues of these. And we have to validate access to objects by subjects. And the terms we have used here are this one is I command J entry of the access matrix defines the set of operations that a process executes in domain on perform an object event. That is nothing but on D1 on F1 object, D1 domain can perform what type of operations. Okay. And the next is allowing controlled domain switching. And we have discussed that by allowing control change to the protection state, we can achieve those issues via column entry changes and row entry changes. And coming to the implementation of this access matrix, right? Um, we have to validate the access, means access validation should be done. And when we are executing any operation or on object O, the access list for that object O is first searched in the domain list. Then only we have to give validation for that particular access. Similarly, granting rights means an access right R for any object O is granted to the domain only when that list of object O is first searched in the list of domain D. Means, and passing rights also say the access right R for object O is passed from a domain D1 to another domain D2 when either the owner right for object O or copyright for access right R is there, then only we have to pass. And access revocation means it can be revocated from deletions to updations, or we can uh, revocate the access rights. Means access right, say any access right R for any object O is revoked means from the domain D, we simply delete R from the access right. So the domain will not contain the access rights of O. Okay, you can easily modify these revocation rights. I hope you all have understood this topic of access control. Thank you.